Welcome to this study. Today, we're going to dive into a truly fascinating analytical framework, one that connects modern geopolitics directly to ancient texts. A lot of the time, the Dead Sea Scrolls are just viewed as these dusty, ancient relics from a totally bygone era, right? But today, we're actually going to explore how some researchers believe they might function as a precise mathematical blueprint for today's geopolitical headlines. Now, this entire study is based completely on the teachings from the YouTube channel Ken Johnson, also known as Bible Facts. The link to his channel is down in the description box below. And before we really get going here, prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated. And give a hype and like, please. All right, let's just jump right into it. So here is our roadmap for the study. We'll start off by unpacking the Latter Days prophecy, then we'll examine the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. After that, we'll look at the patterns of modern wars, explore how geopolitics ties into spiritual warfare, and finally, we'll wrap up with some future speculations and timelines. All right, Section 1, the Latter Days prophecy, setting the foundation. The source anchors this entire geopolitical worldview in a very specific ancient text. To start, the source points us straight to Jeremiah chapter 49. This is a text that details a historical judgment on the ancient region of Elam. Now, why does that matter to us today? Well, ancient Elam actually corresponds geographically to modern-day Western Iran. And this is a hugely relevant detail because that specific region is exactly where so much of Iran's critical nuclear and military infrastructure is sitting right now. Now, you might be thinking, hey, isn't this just ancient history? Wasn't this all resolved way back in the distant past? But the speaker highlights a really specific, absolutely crucial phrase from the text. In the latter days, I will bring the captivity back again. Because it explicitly says latter days, the source firmly believes this ancient prophecy isn't just history. It points directly to our modern era, signaling an event that is literally unfolding in the Middle East as we speak. To figure out what latter days actually means, the source relies heavily on the theology preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to this framework, human history doesn't just meander randomly. It actually moves in these massive 2,000-year cycles or ages. So the latter days aren't just some vague poetic idea. They represent the absolute mathematical end of one of these 2,000-year ages. More specifically, it refers to the final 50-year Jubilee period of that age. And a Jubilee in ancient Hebrew culture wasn't just a random number on a page. It was a massive socioeconomic reset. A 50th year of complete debt forgiveness, releasing of captives, and returning of ancestral lands. It's a huge deal. The speaker calculates that we're currently entering this exact, culturally weighty 50-year window where all these long-dormant prophecies are supposedly coming to a head. Moving on to Section 2, Dead Sea Scroll Calendar, unlocking the ancient math. To really grasp the speaker's timeline for these latter days, we have to dig into the specific mathematics he's using. So we've got a really stark contrast between two very different timekeeping systems here. On one hand, we have the modern Jewish calendar, which was established by Hillel II around the 4th century. Now, this one is a lunar calendar. That means festival dates fluctuate, and it relies on adding an entire leap month just to stay aligned with the agricultural seasons. But on the other hand, we have the ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar. This is a 364-day solar calendar. Because of its incredibly rigid mathematical structure and its use of a unique leap week, the festivals fall on the exact same day of the week every single year, no exceptions. The historical context is super fascinating here. The Essenes, the community who actually authored the Dead Sea Scrolls, they explicitly rejected that fluctuating lunar calendar used by the mainstream temple priesthood. They believed their rigid 364-day solar calendar was a divine, perfect system, literally handed down directly by angels. And the source firmly believes that only this ancient solar calendar aligns perfectly with biblical events and these cyclical prophetic timelines. By applying this solar calendar, the speaker maps out this really grand timeline of the ages. According to the Dead Sea Scroll math, there was a 2,000-year age from creation to the age of Torah, which kicked off when Abraham was called. Then exactly another 2,000 years passed from the age of Torah to the destruction of the Second Temple and the beginning of the Church Age. This current era we're in, referred to in these texts as the Age of Grace, is calculated to end around the year 2076 AD. But here's where the crucial piece of math comes in. When you subtract one 50-year Jubilee period from 2076, that calculation drops you exactly into the year 2026. The speaker theorizes that this mathematical bridge places our current geopolitical events squarely at the very, very end of the Age of Grace. Section 3, Patterns of Modern Wars. Historical Correlations. This is where the source applies this ancient calendar framework to conflicts happening in our modern world. Okay, the speaker calculated a pretty remarkable mathematical anomaly here using some custom Dead Sea Scroll calendar software. Let's look at the Yom Kippur War. That broke out on October 5th and 6th in 1973. Now, on the modern Gregorian or lunar calendars, that date seems entirely random, right? But on the Dead Sea Scroll solar calendar, those exact days fell on Tabernacles 3. That's the third day of the Festival of Tabernacles. Now, fast forward exactly 50 years to the Gaza War, which started on October 6th and 7th, 2023. When you run that modern Gregorian date through the ancient solar calendar, it also lands exactly on Tabernacles 3. And the Festival of Tabernacles isn't just some obscure date on a page. It's a major, historic pilgrimage feast. So we've got two massive, generation-defining wars breaking out on the exact same ancient festival day, precisely 50 years apart. The source suggests that when you use the correct ancient calendar, these modern wars aren't just random occurrences at all. They're perfectly synchronized cyclical patterns.
Section 4. Geopolitics and Spiritual Warfare. The present conflict. Pivoting over to current events, the source takes a look at raw geopolitical data, but through a deeply spiritual lens.
The speaker outlines our rapid-fire series of geopolitical shifts that are currently unfolding. We're seeing reports of Israel systematically neutralizing radar stations in western Iran. And remember, that's specifically in that ancient region of Elam we talked about earlier. This is a massive strategic move, because taking out those stations effectively opens up critical air corridors over the territory. At the same time, U.S. forces have been conducting strikes on extensive target networks across the region. Up to the north, there are widespread evacuation orders and ground operations happening in southern Lebanon. This was all prompted by Hezbollah's failure to maintain agreements securing the border at the Litani River, which, is supposed to serve as a strict UN-mandated buffer zone. The speaker is neutrally laying out these headlines for us just to show a region that is undergoing massive structural military shifts all at once. So, how does this tie back? Well, the speaker connects these huge modern military maneuvers directly to ancient texts, and specifically to the Book of Enoch. For a bit of context, the Book of Enoch is an ancient apocalyptic Hebrew text that was found preserved right alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why the source uses it to analyze modern events. The source points out that Enoch, chapter 56, describes this incredible scenario where fallen angels who were previously imprisoned are released right before a time of final judgment. And according to the text, these entities specifically stir up the kings of the East. Historically, those kings are identified as the Medes and Persians, which, again, geographically aligns perfectly with modern-day Iran, to instigate a major war. So basically, the speaker is theorizing that the strategic military headlines we read today are actually the physical, real-world manifestation of an ancient spiritual warfare that was predicted thousands of years ago. Section 5. Future Speculations and Timelines. Looking ahead. We're transitioning now from present-day reporting over to future speculations. So the absolutely critical question the source attempts to answer is this. Based on these ancient calendars and these deeply ingrained cyclical patterns, what does the year 2026 actually hold for the Middle East? A huge component of this prediction revolves around a proposed 70-year cycle. The speaker refers back to another Dead Sea Scroll document, the Jeremiah Apocryphon, which mentions a 70-year period tied specifically to a breach of contract regarding the land of Israel. Now, 70-year cycles are a massive, repeating theme in biblical prophecy, most famously the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. So this time frame naturally carries immense historical weight. The speaker speculates that this modern 70-year cycle was actually triggered back during the 1956 Suez Crisis. That was a time when Israel temporarily took control of the Gaza Strip and then subsequently handed it back. If you take 1956 and you add exactly 70 years, you land squarely in 2026 or 2027. Therefore, the source calculates that the current, heavily entrenched conflict surrounding Gaza and the broader region is historically projected to reach its definitive resolution right around that exact time. Furthermore, the speaker brings up this really fascinating theory of cyclical poetic justice. History tells us that in 538 BC, under King Cyrus, the Persian Empire freed the Jewish people from captivity, and this era is deeply, deeply tied to the festival of Purim. The historical context of Purim is just crucial here, guys. It celebrates the Jewish people miraculously surviving a massive plot of total annihilation from within the ancient Persian Empire. So, looking ahead to 2026, the speaker notes that on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, Purim happens to fall on a precise Sabbath weekend. He speculates whether we might actually see an exact historical inversion of the original Purim story. Imagine a scenario where in 2026, actions taken by Israel might somehow help free the Iranian people from their current radical government, aligning perfectly with the ancient festival of Purim on that solar calendar. It's a stunning concept. And that really leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to ponder as we conclude this portion of our study. Honestly, regardless of your personal worldview, you kind of have to ask, are we watching ancient cyclical patterns repeat themselves in today's modern headlines? Are the wars, the precise dates, and these massive geopolitical shifts merely random events in a chaotic world? Or are they operating on a deeply ingrained mathematical clock that was literally written down in the Dead Sea Scrolls millennia ago? It for sure forces you to look at the daily news from an entirely different perspective. If you want to dig deeper into these ancient texts, the solar calendar, and the specific mathematical calculations we covered today, the source channel is Ken Johnson, Bible Facts, and a link is below in the description box. As always, prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated, and give a hype and like, please. Thank you so much for joining us for this study, and keep seeking the truth.